Welcome to the Work Trends podcast from Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan Mbiro. Every week, I interview interesting people who are reimagining work. And be sure to check out our Work Trends Twitter chat events calendar located at talentculture.com on the podcast page. Welcome, everyone, to the Talent Culture Work Trends podcast, sponsored today by Fama Technologies. I'm your host, Megan Mbiro, and today we are looking at social screening and how it is increasingly helping recruiters hire the best fits for their companies. Social screening is the process of using social media to research potential candidates for a job. This can include looking at their online profiles, posts, interactions, of course, to get a better sense of their personality, their qualifications. More and more employers are using social screening as part of their hiring process, as it can be an effective way to assess candidates. Today, social screening has become even more advanced with the use of sophisticated tools, algorithms, you name it. So today, we are joined by Ben Monez, CEO of Fama.io, the world's largest social media screening company and leader in the application of artificial intelligence technology in background screening services. Ben has held executive roles at a variety of enterprise software companies and briefly worked in venture capital before starting Fama. Ben is also a respected voice in academia, international media on topics related to entrepreneurship, artificial intelligence, and people risk management. He contributes to the conversation around these topics on panels and as a featured guest at conferences around the world. He's a regular guest lecturer at MIT Sloan, UCLA, Anderson, and USC Marshall School of Business. He's a busy person. So listen, welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Megan, for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, we're so excited you're here. Listen, first question for you. How does social screening impact the employee experience?
Sure. Well, I think too often background screening is kind of regarded as this dirty thing that happens at the front of the candidate funnel, part of the initial onboarding experience that most folks, don't like to talk about. We don't like to shout from the rooftops, hey, look at our background screening program and our strategy. And so when we think, about social screening and sort of the modern background check, if you will, looking at things like intolerance, threats, harassment, we're less concerned, for example, if you went to the school you say you went to, if you, smoked marijuana before a job interview, fail a drug test, that's not what we do. We're more focused on looking online, publicly available online record at things like intolerance, threats, harassment, the sorts of things that, could, if left unchecked, find their way into a company culture and create some damage. So when it comes to, the employee experience, we encourage customers to think, and when we say customers, I mean HR teams at companies large and small. Imagine your business if everyone at the company had an intolerance check, right? Imagine if we were able to look at threats, harassment through the lens of, this kind of very modern and up-to-date record, the digital identity. That's kind of what we say when we say social screening in the employee experience. So imagine interactions between people, whether it's around the conference room, the water cooler, cafeteria, on meetings, et cetera. Really, when we say employee experience, we mean how can your screening strategy and looking at things that are truly reflective of a cohesive, safe, welcoming workplace, screening for those sorts of things at the front of the candidate funnel, what will that do for the existing employee experience for the folks that are already there? And as you build that org brick by brick, person by person, thread by thread, how can these sorts of advanced screening at the front of the candidate funnel help create an experience for everyone that's reflective of where they want to be, what they care about?
I'm kind of scratching my head. Why don't more companies conduct social screening as part of their recruiting and retention processes? We're not talking about this really, Ben.
It's funny, this is something it's certainly an emerging market. For the first time, we've been at this since 2015, so just turned the corner on 8 years now. And for the first time last year, HR.com, PBSA, they put out a survey, Professional Background Screener Association, sort of looking, globally, domestically, across the world. What are HR teams? What are background screening pros? What are they planning to add to their packages, to their toolkit in the coming year? And for the first time ever, in the history of the survey, social media screening was, for the very first time, the number one area of new expansion. And this is happening internally, right? Like, this is stuff that, people are Googling people, Facebooking people, it's a thing, right? Everybody's done it. You look at, the surveys out of Career Builder and SHRM, they'll call out that, more than 70% of employers are doing some form of, social media check or internet check, Googling somebody before they come on board. But I think why companies don't conduct it as part of their recruiting and retention process is like, there's this kind of misplaced notion that when you do a social media check, you're going to see the stuff, relationship announcements, pregnancy announcements, right? You're going to see protected classes of information. You're going to see things that, as we all know in the HR world, like you don't want to see as part of the candidate screening process. So I think there's this kind of like preconceived notion around what you'll get back if you initiate this sort of check or this sort of practice in your business. But the beauty of it with us is like, as a third party, we blind customers to the dog pictures. We blind them to photos of somebody in their wheelchair, like playing basketball, right? Like we'll blind folks that sort of stuff. We're only going to show you as an end customer if there are any hits that are reflective of, the sort of risks that are important to your organization. So if there's like a racist tweet out there and you said that's important to you, or maybe someone has some harassment litigation in their background and you wanted to know about that before bringing them on board, that's the sort of thing we'll report on. But I think there's this conception of like, how can I configure it to reflect only what's job relevant, only what's business relevant, and nothing else? I think that kind of notion, that conception is what holds a lot of companies back from saying, yeah, this is something we should do, even though most of their recruiters are doing it already.
Yeah, exactly. And, you've done some interesting research. What did you discover about companies that screen social media content?
Yeah, so 54% of employers have mentioned that they don't use, that they've changed a hiring decision on the basis of a hit that comes back from social media. And there's a really, emerging, interesting piece of research that actually came out of Harvard and a business called Cornerstone On Demand, in the e-learning and, general workforce management software space now, that essentially tied toxicity in the workplace to productivity, seeing things like team productivity dropping by about 40% in toxic work environments, good people being 50% more likely to leave an organization when working with someone who is toxic. So I think it's, forward-thinking HR leaders have recognized that the fabric of our company is made up of every single person. Of each new person coming in is going to contribute or detract from our mission and values, from our goals, from, what this kind of, connective tissue between individuals. We're always building that with each new person coming in. So there's real data behind it. I think we all know if you say you're in a meeting with someone and they make a comment that's, offensive to you or maybe intolerant, maybe they didn't realize it, but that's the sort of thing where you're not as focused, right? You're thinking about that comment. You're not thinking about what's up on the whiteboard. You're not thinking about the next slide, right? So when that sort of thing happens at work, folks get distracted. They want to leave. And we know with the pandemic, it's an employee's market still. Jobs report came out yesterday, 50-year low in unemployment, right? So employees have more choices than ever before about where they want to work, how they want to align themselves. And sure, comp is a big reason. People are like, dang, I should be getting paid more. And you should, right? And that's happening. But it's also the culture you want to work with, right? Who are the people that share that same value set, that's reflective of what you might care about in your home life or what you might care about amongst your friends. So I think you're starting to see more, especially as the labor market shifts, employees start to say, hey, look, I want to work with places that share my values and work with people that, reflect the core things I care about. And I don't mean like, everyone likes the same color blue or votes for the same president. I mean, you're talking about the non-negotiables, right? A workplace free from intolerance, from, harassment, that kind of thing.
Well, plus a lot of us are working in a virtual environment now. So the stakes are even higher to try to get to know people, right? I mean, how are we getting to know people?
It's so funny. I totally agree. We meet our coworkers now by friending them on Facebook, follow them on Twitter, right? Like DM with them on Instagram, right? That's happening today. We just wrapped up a trip, my business partner and I in the UK. And a lot of the themes of conversation were like, yeah, it's funny, guys, you coming out here and having this meeting. This is the first time I've met my coworker, right? Like there are people who are coming to meetings with us and have done everything over Zoom. So it stands to reason that like if we're interacting in these digital spaces, the importance of digital identity will naturally follow.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, or maybe it's not an elephant in the room at all. Compliance or risk factors for companies that use social media as a screening tool. Like, where are we now today? Because things are changing quickly.
For sure. So back in 2011, the FTC put out a memorandum actually that essentially declared social media screening as falling under the same guise as other background check types. It's a FCRA compliant, FCRA, for those who I'm sure are familiar with that acronym who are listening. If you're not, it's basically what protects, consumers. It protects job candidates from the overreach of big corporations stealing your data and making decisions without your involvement, right? Really, social media screening is done the right way. FCRA, GDPR, EEOC compliant solution. That means, going with a third party, a company that focuses on things like maximum possible accuracy in their reporting, reports only on job relevant information. I could, bore you for a whole podcast about all the ins and outs of the compliance framework here and the right way to do it. But, the risks of doing it yourself, I think, are what scare people away. If you do this sort of thing yourself, right, you're one, exposing yourself to things that you shouldn't see, like we talked about at the top, right? If I'm having a recruiter do this internally, that means that they're going to see the person's gender, they're going to see the person's ethnicity, you're going to see, a person's pregnancy, right? You're going to see all these protected classes that the EEO says quite simply, you can't unring the bell. You can't unsee that information if you see it, and you will use it as part of your hiring process due to the bias that naturally occurs within all of us where you see these sorts of things online. So that's one risk of doing it yourself, and it's very difficult as a team to blind yourself to that information because social media, just like real life, is filled with all elements of, who we are and where we like to go, who we like to hang out with, who we love, who we don't love, etc. So, seeing stuff that you shouldn't see is a big risk of doing it on your own. Simultaneously, like doing this comprehensively, doing it consistently, then you'll be asking somebody to basically, on your team, be the arbiter of what intolerance is, right? Be the arbiter of what harassment is, right? These kind of opaque, open-ended concepts that if you have two people who look at the same tweet, for example, might have varying definitions of what intolerance is. And that could be based on how they came up, the institutions that they were raised by, their family, their friends. It's only natural, right? People have different points of view on the same topic. So going with a third party, really helps squash those sorts of risks because you can highly configure the solution on the front end to make sure that you're only filtering for job relevant information. You're blinded to, all of the protected class info that you'd otherwise see doing it on your own. And three, you're getting a consistent way that screening is done where every single person, regardless of what they look like, where they're from, etc., they're getting the same fair shake and everyone gets it with consent. So just like every other background check, this is an informed consent product where, the candidate is aware that it's going on. If you're going to take action on it, as an employer, you can share a copy of that report with the candidate, explain to them why you're not moving forward, give them a chance to kind of contest the results. And if you do that by yourself, really hard to do that, right? So that's kind of the main reasons for, I'd say in a sentence, just don't do it yourself. Go to a third party because doing it yourself is like full of all sorts of risk.
Absolutely. And this market that we're in right now and the amount of people saying, I'm in a toxic work culture, it's kind of staggering, really. So, I want to get back to the basics here. What are the core behaviors? I think there's 6 of them that have the highest likelihood of leading to this toxic work culture. And how do you identify them as most concerning?
The important piece here is to consider, again, this is not about, I'll tell you what it's not. So this is not a score. So it's not like a thumbs up or a thumbs down, not a yes or a no, a recommendation on a person. And the categories, aren't like red Solo cups from college or you having a cocktail or, you using some profanity online. Like that's not what employers care about. What employers are looking for is the normalized point of view on things, and I've been mentioning here on the podcast a little bit, but things like intolerance, things like harassment, things like threats, things like promoting violence online, people who might be boasting about using or selling drugs, right? And cannabis, sure, you can turn cannabis on and off with FAMA. That's something that we typically don't see as a top flag in terms of risk that's coming back. But really think of things like intolerance, threats, harassment, violence, crime, and drugs. So that's the kind of sort of risks that you look for. And employers are basically saying like, I'm looking for the person that doesn't think there's anything wrong with acting in an intolerant or harassing manner, right? Like it's not the dirty joke that you made, a few years ago. That's not what employers are using this for. They're basically saying, what's the frame of mind that this person is going to bring to a customer interaction? What's that experience that they're going to bring into the workplace when they're, the camera's off, right? The Zoom interview is over. 9 months in, they're having these one-on-one private interactions with other employees. Like, how can we ensure that in a largely distributed, remote work environment, that they're continuing to reflect the core values of the business? So think of it as kind of like the non-negotiables. I always say, racist people typically don't think they're racist, that type of thing. And
how much is it getting normalized? That's really it. What is this person's compass? How are they reacting? Because you don't know. You're showing up for a one-on-one. Remember, you might be in a virtual culture. You've never seen this person in person. Like, this is about safety. This is about, from my perspective, this is about safety and that kind of well-being and that peace of mind to know that, because the world is kind of crazy right now. Breaking news, everybody out there in the Work Trends community, kind of kooky, just saying.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I mean, think about like the way it used to be. Like, it was all about the handshake. It was all about the eye contact. It was all about, at least in my day, the resume on the nice paper, right? That you would bring in, and the thank you note that you would send, these kind of like demonstrations of a thoughtful character who's going to reflect and embody the values of our organization. But now you log on and you log off, right? And so I think these questions are only more important as the stakes go up. And, like we're talking about, there isn't a physical workplace any longer, and we're all engaging in these largely digital spaces.
So, last but not least, what industries would you say are most at risk for toxic work environments? And why do you believe this is?
So hit rates for us, interestingly enough, we can kind of look at our spread. We work with a little bit less than 2,000 businesses right now in more than 100 countries. And so we've got kind of a cool, point of view into how different industries and, different types of businesses, the levels of intolerance, threats, harassment, violence, et cetera, all those flags we went through, we can kind of see across the board the greatest incidence rates. And, historically, we've seen it in technology, media, entertainment, where there's a lot of this. And this is large tech companies, small tech companies, but also, to a lesser degree, financial services, healthcare. So those are the areas I'd say where we've seen the most risk over time. Now, the really interesting piece about that is those are the kind of high revenue per employee industries that spend more on their background screening and had higher budgets. So we're the first to adopt solutions like ours. So as we now are finding ways to automate and optimize our solution even further and bring the price down to customers, we're seeing that more and more customers can afford it. So we're actually seeing a ton right now in retail, in transportation, and even manufacturing to some degree. So those industries too, I think you are starting to see a slightly higher incidence rate. I just don't have as much data because it's more of a emerging set of verticals for us.
Well, listen, Ben, I want to thank you for stopping by today and sharing your sage. This has been really interesting.
Really appreciate it, Megan. I'd be happy to come back anytime. And thank you guys so much for having me and Representative Fama here on the podcast. We appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Work Trends Podcast, your favorite source for all that's new and exciting in the world of work. If you love what we do here, make sure to share our podcast with your friends, your colleagues, you name it. And don't forget to tune in for our next episode. Catch up with you next time. Thanks to listening to Work Trends from Talent Culture. Join us every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern for a live Twitter chat with our podcast guest. To learn more about guests featured on today's show, visit the show notes for this episode at talentculture.com and help us spread the word. Subscribe to Work Trends wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us a rating, review in iTunes. Share Work Trends with your coworkers, your friends. Look forward to it. See you next time.